Have you ever been judged by your cover, humiliated in public for reasons you can't comprehend? For 72-year-old Eleanor Vance, a retired nurse and a woman with a heart of gold, her dream trip to Paris turned into a nightmare before the plane even left the tarmac. A flight attendant, dripping with disdain, denied her the first-class seat she had every right to occupy. Little did the attendant know, the elderly woman she was trying to shove to the back of the plane was the mother of the man who owned the entire airline. What happens next is a story of quiet dignity, a son's unwavering love, and the kind of hard, swift karma that will leave you breathless. Stay with us as we unravel the story of how one phone call brought an entire airline to a standstill and changed lives forever. The air in the exclusive Polaris Lounge at Newark Liberty International Airport hummed with a quiet energy. It was the sound of success, of lives lived in perpetual motion. Men in crisp, tailored suits spoke in hushed tones about mergers and acquisitions, their voices a low counterpoint to the clinking of ice in glasses of expensive scotch. Women with perfectly coiffed hair and handbags that cost more than a small car scrolled through their phones, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screens, their expressions a carefully curated mask of detached elegance. And then there was Eleanor Vance. At 72, Eleanor was a woman who had seen more of life from the window of a city bus than from the plush leather seats of an airport lounge. Her hands, though meticulously clean, bore the faint indelible roadmap of a life spent in service to others. They were the hands of a retired nurse, hands that had soothed fevers, held the hands of the dying, and swaddled newborn babies. Her dress, a simple but elegant floral print she'd bought on sale at Macy's, was her Sunday best, saved for this very occasion. Her hair, a cloud of soft silvery curls, was her crowning glory, and she wore it with a natural grace that no amount of money could buy. In her purse, nestled beside a well-worn copy of a Maya Angelou book of poetry and a small tin of butterscotch candies, was a single, crisp, first-class ticket to Paris. It was a gift from her son, Adrian, for her birthday. "You've spent your whole life looking after everyone else, Mom," he'd told her, his voice thick with emotion over the phone. "It's time someone looked after you." Eleanor had protested, of course. The sheer extravagance of it all was overwhelming. But Adrian had insisted. "You deserve it," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. And so here she was, a woman from a modest working-class background, sitting in a lounge that felt like a different world, her heart aflutter with a mixture of excitement and a nagging sense of not quite belonging. She clutched her boarding pass, the bold letters spelling out Vance, E, Seat 2A First Class, a talisman against the insecurities that nibbled at the edges of her confidence. She had never flown first class before. In fact, she had only been on a plane a handful of times in her life. The thought of it was both thrilling and terrifying. A lie flat bed, gourmet meals, a glass of real champagne. It was the stuff of movies, not her life. When the boarding call for United Airlines Flight UA57 to Paris Charles de Gaulle was announced, Eleanor's heart gave a little leap. She gathered her things, her movements deliberate and unhurried, and made her way to the gate. She presented her boarding pass to the gate agent, a polite young man who gave her a warm smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Vance." Walking down the jet bridge, Eleanor felt a thrill of anticipation. This was it, the beginning of her grand adventure. She stepped onto the plane, her eyes wide with wonder. The first-class cabin was even more luxurious than she had imagined. The seats, or rather the private pods, were like something out of a science fiction movie. Sleek, spacious, and bathed in a soft, ambient blue light. She found her seat, 2A, a window seat at the front of the cabin. She carefully stowed her small carry-on bag in the overhead compartment and was about to settle into the plush leather seat when a voice, sharp and laced with an icy condescension, cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Eleanor turned to see a flight attendant standing in the aisle. She was a tall, willowy blonde with a name tag that read Carolyn. Her smile was a tight, practiced affair that didn't quite reach her cold blue eyes. "Oh, hello," Eleanor said with a warm smile. I was just getting settled. This is my seat, 2A. Carolyn's eyes flickered from Eleanor's face to her simple dress, then to her sensible shoes. A flicker of something, disdain, disbelief, crossed her features before being quickly masked by a veneer of professional politeness. I'm sure there's been a mistake, Carolyn said, her voice syrupy sweet but with an undercurrent of steel. This is a first-class cabin. Perhaps you've gotten turned around? Economy is at the back of the plane. Eleanor's smile faltered. She felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. No, dear, she said, her voice quiet but firm. This is my seat, 2A. She reached into her purse and pulled out her boarding pass, holding it out for Carolyn to see. Carolyn barely glanced at it. I understand, she said, in a tone one might use with a confused child. But these seats are reserved for our premium passengers. Sometimes there are glitches in the system. If you'll just come with me, I'll help you find your correct seat. She made a move to take Eleanor's arm, but Eleanor stood her ground. There is no mistake, she said, her voice a little stronger this time. My son bought me this ticket. It's a birthday present. The mention of her son seemed to amuse Carolyn. That's very sweet of him, she said with a patronizing little laugh. But as I said, these seats are very expensive. Are you sure you're in the right place? The implication was clear, and it hung in the air like a foul odor. You don't belong here. You can't afford this. The other first-class passengers were starting to take notice. A man in a suit a few rows back peered over his newspaper with an irritated expression. A woman with a small yapping dog in a designer carrier looked on with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Eleanor felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. Her dream trip was turning into a public shaming. She had never been one to make a scene, but she was not about to be bullied out of a seat she had every right to occupy. I am in the right place, she said, her voice trembling slightly but laced with a steely resolve. And I would appreciate it if you would check your passenger manifest before you make any more assumptions. Carolyn's smile vanished completely, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Ma'am, she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. I am the head purser on this flight. I know who is supposed to be in this cabin, and it's not you. Now you can either walk to the back of the plane with me, or I can have you removed from this aircraft. The choice is yours. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She looked around at the other passengers, her eyes pleading for someone to intervene, to say something. But they all looked away, suddenly engrossed in their phones or the safety card in the seat pocket in front of them. In that moment, Eleanor Vance had never felt more alone. The world seemed to shrink, the luxurious first-class cabin closing in on Eleanor like a gilded cage. The soft blue ambient lighting now felt cold and clinical. The scent of expensive leather and air freshener was cloying, making her feel nauseous. Carolyn stood before her, a sentinel of judgment, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of triumph and impatience. The silence in the cabin was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the aircraft's ventilation system and the frantic thumping of Eleanor's own heart. For a moment, Eleanor considered giving in. The thought of being forcibly removed from the plane, of the stares and the whispers, was a mortifying prospect. It would be easier to just walk away, to retreat to the anonymity of the economy cabin where she supposedly belonged. But then, a wave of indignation washed over her, hot and fierce. She thought of her son, Adrian. She thought of the pride in his voice when he told her he'd bought her this ticket. She thought of the sacrifices she had made for him, the double shifts she'd worked at the hospital to make sure he had everything he needed, the nights she'd spent awake, worrying and praying for his success. This ticket wasn't just a seat on a plane. It was a symbol. It was a testament to her son's love and a validation of her life's work. And she would not allow this woman, this stranger with ice in her veins, to tarnish it. With a newfound resolve, Eleanor looked Carolyn directly in the eye. I will not be moving, she said, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside her. I suggest you do as I asked and check your passenger manifest. My name is Eleanor Vance." Carolyn let out an exasperated sigh, a theatrical display of her waning patience for the benefit of the other passengers. "Fine," she snapped. "Have it your way." She pulled a tablet from a nearby charging station and began tapping at the screen with an aggressive finger. As she scrolled through the list of names, a flicker of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by a renewed scowl. Eleanor's name was there, just as she had said, Seat 2A. But for Carolyn, this was not a matter of a simple mistake. It was a matter of principle. In her mind, the carefully curated world of first class had been breached by an interloper, and she was not about to admit defeat. "There seems to be an issue with the booking," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "We'll have to sort this out. In the meantime, you'll need to wait at the back of the plane." "I will wait here," Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. "In my seat." The standoff had reached a fever pitch. Carolyn's face was a mask of thunderous rage. She was about to say something else, something cutting and cruel, when Eleanor did something that surprised even herself. She reached into her purse, her hands trembling slightly, and pulled out her phone. "I think," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "that I need to make a phone call." Carolyn scoffed. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. It won't change a thing." Eleanor ignored her. With trembling fingers, she navigated to her contacts and pressed the name at the top of the list, Adrian. The phone rang once, twice, and then his voice, warm and familiar, filled her ear. "Mom, are you on the plane? Is everything okay?" Tears pricked at the back of Eleanor's eyes, but she fought them back. She would not give Carolyn the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Adrian, honey," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. I'm having a little trouble." In a sterile, glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago, Adrian Vance, the 42-year-old CEO of Polaris Airlines, one of the largest and most successful airlines in the world, was in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation. He was surrounded by a team of lawyers and executives, all of them hanging on his every word. He was known for his calm, collected demeanor, his razor-sharp intellect, and his uncanny ability to remain unflappable under pressure. But the moment he heard the tremor in his mother's voice, the carefully constructed facade of the powerful CEO crumbled, and he was just a son, worried about his mother. "Mom, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with a sudden urgency. He stood up from the boardroom table, a silent gesture that brought the meeting to an abrupt halt. All eyes were on him. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "The flight attendant, she doesn't believe I have a first-class ticket. She wants me to move to the back of the plane. She's threatening to have me removed." Adrian's blood ran cold. A wave of fury so intense it was almost blinding surged through him. He pictured his mother, his gentle, kind-hearted mother, being humiliated in front of a plane full of strangers. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. "What's her name, Mom?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The flight attendant's name." Eleanor glanced at Carolyn's name tag. "Carolyn," she whispered, "and the flight number?" "United Airlines Flight 57 to Paris." Adrian's mind was racing. United Airlines was a code-share partner with his own airline, Polaris. He had contacts there, high-level contacts. He could make a call, have this sorted out in a matter of minutes. But that wasn't enough. A simple phone call wouldn't erase the humiliation his mother had endured. It wouldn't teach this Carolyn the lesson she so desperately needed to learn. No, this required a more personal touch. He turned to his team of executives, his face a mask of cold, controlled anger. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for question. "I'm afraid something has come up. We'll have to postpone this meeting." Without another word, he strode out of the boardroom, his phone still pressed to his ear. "Mom," he said, his voice now a soothing balm, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. "Listen to me. Don't move. Don't say another word to her. I'm on my way." Eleanor's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean you're on your way? Adrian, you're in Chicago. I have a jet, he said simply, as if he were talking about a car. I'll be there in an hour. Just stay strong for me, Mom. I promise you I will fix this. As the line went dead, Eleanor was left with a mixture of bewilderment and a glimmer of hope. She didn't fully understand what Adrian was planning, but she trusted him. He had always been her rock, her protector. A small, sad smile touched her lips as a memory from long ago surfaced in her mind. Adrian, at 10 years old, standing up to a neighborhood bully who had made her cry with a cruel taunt. He had been so small then, but his eyes had blazed with the same protective fire she had just heard in his voice. "Don't you ever talk to my mom like that again," he had yelled, his little fists clenched at his sides. She looked at Carolyn, who was now tapping her foot impatiently, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "Well," she sneered, "did your son the big shot sort everything out for you?" Eleanor simply held her gaze, her silence more powerful than any words she could have uttered. She didn't have to fight this battle alone. Her son was coming, and hell was coming with him. The hour that followed was the longest of Eleanor's life. She remained in her seat, a silent, solitary figure of defiance in a cabin filled with a palpable tension. Carolyn, the flight attendant, having failed to intimidate Eleanor into moving, had resorted to a campaign of petty psychological warfare. She bustled up and down the aisle, her movements sharp and aggressive, pointedly ignoring Eleanor while offering effusive service to the other passengers. She topped off champagne glasses, fluffed pillows, and engaged in obsequious chatter, all while casting venomous glances in Eleanor's direction. The other passengers, for their part, seemed to have chosen their side. They accepted Carolyn's fawning attention with a sense of entitlement, their initial discomfort at the confrontation now replaced by an air of smug complicity. They were part of the club, and Eleanor was the outsider who had dared to crash their exclusive party. Eleanor could feel their eyes on her, their whispered conversations just at the edge of her hearing. She pulled her book of poetry from her purse, the familiar weight of it a small comfort in her hands. She tried to read, to lose herself in the lyrical beauty of Maya Angelou's words, but the lines blurred on the page, her mind a maelstrom of anxiety and humiliation. Suddenly, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, startling everyone. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay. We are just waiting for a last-minute, VIP guest to board. We should be on our way shortly. Thank you for your patience." A ripple of murmurs went through the cabin. A VIP guest? At this hour? Carolyn's eyes lit up. This was a welcome distraction, a chance to reassert her authority and impress someone of actual importance. She smoothed down her already immaculate uniform and stood at the front of the cabin, a practiced smile plastered on her face, ready to greet the mystery guest. A few minutes later, the door to the jet bridge opened, and two figures stepped onto the plane. The first was the gate agent, looking flustered and out of breath. The second was a man who seemed to suck all the air out of the cabin. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that bespoke a quiet, understated power. He had a commanding presence, an aura of authority that was impossible to ignore. His face was a study in controlled intensity, his jaw set, his dark eyes sweeping over the cabin with a piercing gaze that seemed to miss nothing. It was Adrian Vance. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. He had said he was coming, but she hadn't truly believed it. Not like this. He looked like a man who could move mountains, and at that moment, she knew he had come to move this one for her. Carolyn, a fawning smile already on her lips, stepped forward to greet the newcomer. "Welcome aboard, sir," she gushed, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness. "I'm Carolyn, the head purser on this flight. Can I show you to your seat?" Adrian's gaze settled on her, and for the first time Carolyn's smile faltered. There was something in his eyes, a cold, hard fury that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't say a word. He simply held her gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment before his eyes scanned the cabin and landed on his mother. The hard lines of his face softened instantly, replaced by an expression of such profound love and concern that it took Eleanor's breath away. He walked towards her, his long strides eating up the aisle, and knelt beside her seat, taking her trembling hands in his. "Mom," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that was meant for her ears only. "Are you okay?" Eleanor could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. The relief was so overwhelming, so absolute, that it left her speechless. Adrian squeezed her hands gently, then rose to his full height, his body a formidable shield between his mother and the rest of the world. He turned his attention back to Carolyn, who was watching the scene with a mixture of confusion and growing dread. The other passengers were now staring openly, their curiosity piqued by this sudden, dramatic turn of events. "You're Carolyn?" Adrian asked, his voice deceptively calm. Yes," she stammered, her professional composure beginning to crack. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes, Carolyn," Adrian said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper that carried to every corner of the silent cabin. "There is a very big problem." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. He didn't hand it to her. He held it up for her to see. The name on the card read, Adrian Vance, CEO, Polaris Airlines. The color drained from Carolyn's face. Her jaw went slack, and her eyes widened in horrified disbelief. She looked from the card to Adrian's face, then to Eleanor and back again. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture of a career-ending, life-altering mistake. The man in the suit who had been so irritated earlier was now sinking lower in his seat, a look of dawning horror on his face. The woman with the yapping dog suddenly looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. The entire cabin was frozen in a state of stunned silence. "You see, Carolyn," Adrian continued, his voice laced with a cold, righteous anger. "Polaris Airlines is a majority shareholder in this airline, which means for all intents and purposes I am your boss, and this woman," he said, his voice softening as he gestured to his mother, "this woman that you have spent the last hour humiliating and harassing, this woman is Eleanor Vance, my mother." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence in the cabin was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Carolyn stood frozen, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She had not just insulted a passenger, she had insulted the mother of the man who held her entire future in the palm of his hand. "So yes, Carolyn," Adrian said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "We have a problem, and I can assure you by the time this plane lands in Paris, your problems will have only just begun." The immediate aftermath of Adrian's revelation was a scene of silent, chaotic reckoning. The carefully constructed social hierarchy of the first-class cabin had been blown to smithereens, and the passengers who had so recently been reveling in their own importance now looked like children caught in a lie. The air, once thick with smug entitlement, was now heavy with the stench of fear and regret. Carolyn, for her part, seemed to have been struck dumb. Her face, which had been a mask of haughty disdain just moments before, was now a pale, slack-jawed caricature of terror. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on Adrian's face, as if she were hoping that this was all just a horrible nightmare from which she would soon awaken. But Adrian was not a man to be trifled with, and this was no dream. He was a CEO known for his decisiveness and his unwavering commitment to his company's values that Carolyn had so spectacularly violated. However, he was also a man who believed in due process. He would not allow his personal anger, as righteous as it was, to cloud his professional judgment. He would not fire her on the spot, as much as he may have wanted to. He would do this by the book, his book. He turned to the gate agent, who was still hovering nervously by the door. "Please have the captain and the rest of the cabin crew come to the front of the plane immediately," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel that left no room for debate. The gate agent scurried off, eager to escape the charged atmosphere of the cabin. A few moments later, the captain, a distinguished-looking man with silvering temples, and two other flight attendants appeared, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and concern. Adrian addressed the captain first. "Captain," he said, his tone respectful but firm. My name is Adrian Vance. I am the CEO of Polaris Airlines. I trust you are aware of our code-share agreement. The captain's eyes widened in recognition. He had seen Adrian's face in company-wide memos and industry publications. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice a little unsteady. Yes, of course. It's an honor to have you aboard. I had no idea. Clearly, Adrian said, cutting him off. Are you aware of the situation that has been unfolding in your first-class cabin for the past hour? The captain looked from Adrian to Carolyn, then to Eleanor, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. I was told there was a seating discrepancy, he said, his voice a low murmur. A seating discrepancy, Adrian repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it when a member of your crew attempts to publicly humiliate and eject a paying first-class passenger based on nothing more than her own prejudice? The captain's face paled. I was not aware of the specifics, sir. Then allow me to enlighten you, Adrian said. And for the next 5 minutes, in a calm, measured, and utterly devastating tone, he recounted the entire incident, from the moment his mother had stepped onto the plane to the moment he had arrived. He left out no detail, no nuance, no cutting remark. By the time he was finished, the captain looked as if he had aged 10 years. Now, Adrian said, turning his attention to the 2 other flight attendants, I would like to hear your version of events. The 2 women, both of them younger and clearly intimidated by the situation, exchanged a nervous glance. One of them, a brunette with a name tag that read Maria, finally spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. It was like you said, sir, she stammered. Carolyn, she wouldn't let Mrs. Vance take her seat. She kept insisting there was a mistake. And did you do anything to intervene? Adrian asked, his gaze piercing. Maria looked down at her shoes, her face flushed with shame. No, sir, she whispered. Carolyn is the head purser. We didn't feel like we could question her. So you stood by and did nothing while a passenger was being harassed. We're sorry, sir, the other flight attendant mumbled. Adrian's expression was one of profound disappointment. He wasn't just angry at Carolyn's blatant bigotry. He was disappointed in the systemic failure of his crew to uphold the basic principles of human decency. He then turned his attention back to Carolyn, who had finally found her voice, albeit a weak and trembling one. It was a misunderstanding, she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. I was just trying to do my job. The manifest. It was confusing. The manifest was not confusing, Carolyn, Adrian said, his voice cold and devoid of any sympathy. My mother's name was on it, right where it was supposed to be. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a choice. You chose to judge a woman based on the color of her skin and the clothes she was wearing. You chose to abuse your authority. And now you will have to face the consequences of those choices. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Get me HR, he said, his voice low and commanding. I want a full investigation launched into an incident on United Flight 57. The employee's name is Carolyn Smith. I want her entire service record pulled. I want to know if there have been any other complaints of this nature filed against her. As it turned out, there had been. A quick search of the airline's internal records revealed a pattern of similar incidents, a history of microaggressions and complaints from minority passengers that had been swept under the rug, dismissed as misunderstandings or exaggerations. Carolyn was not just a prejudiced flight attendant. She was a serial offender who had been enabled by a system that was all too willing to look the other way. But the final, most damning twist came not from the airline's records, but from one of the other passengers. The man in the suit who had been so visibly annoyed by the initial confrontation, a man by the name of Richard Davenport, was a contractor for Polaris Airlines. His company had just secured a lucrative catering contract with the airline, a deal that Adrian had personally overseen. As the reality of the situation dawned on him, Davenport began to sweat. He had not just been a passive bystander. He had been an active participant in Eleanor's humiliation, with his loud sighs and eye rolls. He had sided with the bully, and now he was face to face with the bully's ultimate victim, the mother of the man who signed his paychecks. Adrian's gaze fell on him, and Davenport felt a jolt of pure terror. He knew with a sickening certainty that his complicity had not gone unnoticed. He had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and the consequences he suspected would be swift and severe. The karma in the cabin was thick enough to choke on, and it was just beginning to make its rounds. With the truth laid bare and the full scope of Carolyn's misconduct exposed, a chilling new reality settled over the first-class cabin. The atmosphere, once a mixture of shock and fear, now curdled into a thick brew of shame and desperate self-preservation. The hard, undeniable consequences of one woman's prejudice were beginning to ripple outwards, and no one in that gilded cage felt safe from the fallout. Adrian, his face a mask of cold, professional fury, concluded his call with HR. "Effective immediately," he announced to the captain, his voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. "Miss Smith is suspended from all duties, pending a full investigation and termination hearing. She's to be confined to the crew rest area for the remainder of this flight. She is not to have any further contact with any passengers. Is that understood?" The captain, his face ashen, nodded numbly. "Yes, Mr. Vance. Understood." Carolyn let out a choked sob, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in real time. "Please," she whimpered, her voice a pathetic parody of the haughty tone she had used just an hour before. "Mr. Vance, please. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Adrian looked at her, his eyes devoid of any pity. "You should have thought of your family and your mortgage before you decided to dehumanize my mother," he said, his voice as cold as the grave. "You are sorry you got caught, Carolyn. That is not the same as being sorry for what you did." He gestured to Maria, the younger flight attendant. "Please escort Miss Smith to the crew rest area." With a final, desperate look at Adrian, Carolyn allowed herself to be led away, her sobs echoing down the aisle, a funeral dirge for her own career. The other passengers watched her go, their faces a mixture of relief and a dawning, sickening realization of their own culpability. Adrian then turned his attention to the remaining passengers, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight, leaving no one untouched by its intensity. "For the rest of you," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "let this be a lesson. My mother is a retired nurse who dedicated 40 years of her life to caring for others, regardless of their background, their wealth, or the color of their skin. She is the kindest, most compassionate woman I have ever known. And today, she was treated with less respect than the dirt on your shoes." He paused, his eyes lingering for a moment on Richard Davenport, the catering contractor, who now looked as if he was about to be physically ill. "Polaris Airlines, and by extension our partners," he continued, his voice hardening, "have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. That policy extends not just to our employees, but to our contractors, our partners, and our passengers. We are in the business of connecting people, not dividing them. We are in the business of service, not judgment." He let his words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow to the collective conscience of the cabin. Then he did something that no one expected. He walked to the front of the cabin and took the intercom from Maria. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." His voice, calm and powerful, boomed through the entire aircraft, from the luxurious pods of first class to the cramped seats of economy. "This is Adrian Vance, the CEO of Polaris Airlines. I want to sincerely apologize for the extended delay. We have had to deal with a serious and unacceptable incident involving a member of the cabin crew." He didn't go into specifics, but he didn't have to. The entire plane had been buzzing with rumors and speculation for the past hour. "I want to take this opportunity to remind every single person on this aircraft, both employees and passengers, of the values that we, as a company, stand for. Respect, dignity, inclusivity. These are not just words in a corporate mission statement. They are the very foundation of who we are, and I promise you, As long as I am the CEO of this airline, we will never, ever waver from those values." He concluded his address with a heartfelt apology to all the passengers for the delay and a promise of a safe and pleasant flight to Paris. As he handed the intercom back to Maria, a strange thing happened. A smattering of applause broke out in the economy cabin, quickly growing into a wave of enthusiastic clapping that spread throughout the entire plane. It was a spontaneous, heartfelt endorsement of his words, a collective sigh of relief that someone in a position of power was willing to stand up for what was right. In the first-class cabin, however, the silence was deafening. The passengers who had been so quick to judge Eleanor were now forced to sit in the uncomfortable silence of their own shame, their applause conspicuously absent. The rest of the flight to Paris was a study in contrasts. For Eleanor, it was everything she had dreamed of and more. Adrian, having made sure his mother was comfortably settled, took a seat in the row behind her. The remaining crew, mortified by the actions of their colleague, tripped over themselves to provide Eleanor with the most impeccable service. She was treated not just as a first-class passenger, but as a queen. She sipped champagne, savored a gourmet meal, and watched the stars from her window, a quiet smile of contentment on her face. Her dream, once deferred, had been gloriously restored. For Carolyn, the flight was a descent into a personal hell. Confined to the small, windowless crew rest area, she was left alone with the wreckage of her life. The karma that had hit her was not just the loss of her job, it was the complete and utter demolition of her pride, her reputation, and her sense of self. She had built her identity on a foundation of perceived superiority, and now, that foundation had been reduced to rubble. And for Richard Davenport, the flight was a 7-hour panic attack. He knew with a certainty that churned in his gut that his lucrative contract with Polaris Airlines was hanging by a thread. His complicity, his silent endorsement of Carolyn's bigotry, was about to cost him millions. The hard karma had indeed come back to hit him, not with a bang, but with the terrifying, silent promise of a future filled with ruin. As the plane began its descent into Paris, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, Eleanor looked out the window, her heart full. She had been tested, humiliated, and brought to the brink of despair. But she had emerged stronger, her dignity intact, her spirit unbroken, and she had learned a valuable lesson, that the best defense against the darkness of prejudice is the unwavering light of love, and that a son's love for his mother can, indeed, move mountains. The silence in the penthouse suite of the Hotel George V was a universe away from the charged, vitriolic quiet of the first-class cabin. Here, the silence was plush, woven from the threads of old money and an unassailable prestige. It was the silence of thick Aubusson carpets swallowing every footstep, of heavy damask curtains muting the heartbeat of Paris, of fresh-cut lilies breathing their scent into the air. Through the grand arched windows, the Eiffel Tower stood sentinel, a filigree of light against the deepening indigo sky. For Eleanor, the opulence was a beautiful, disorienting dream. She stood on the marble balcony, the plush hotel robe a soft armor against the cooling night air, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. She had seen pictures of places like this in magazines, had watched characters in movies inhabit them with a casual ease. But for her, a woman whose greatest luxury had been a paid-off mortgage and a small garden, it felt like wearing a costume. The humiliation of the flight clung to her like a phantom scent, a jarring dissonance against the backdrop of such splendor. She felt the ghost of Carolyn's sneer, the weight of the other passengers' judgment, a stain that even the 5-star soap in the marble bathroom couldn't seem to wash away. Adrian came to stand beside her, his tie gone, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. The formidable CEO had receded, leaving only the sun, his face etched with a weary concern that mirrored her own. He didn't speak, simply placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. They watched the city lights begin their nightly dance, a silent communion of shared trauma and unwavering love. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he finally said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the vastness of the city below. "You were so strong, so dignified." Eleanor let out a shaky breath, the sound fragile in the quiet. "I was scared, Adrian," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't feeling dignified. I was feeling old and black and poor. All the things she saw when she looked at me. For a moment she made me believe her, that I didn't belong." She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his. "When you walked onto that plane, I was so relieved. But I was also terrified for you, to see that anger in your eyes. It reminded me of your father. He had that same fire, that same righteous fury. It was a beautiful thing, but it cost him so much." Adrian's jaw tightened. He knew what she meant. His father, a brilliant but proud man, had fought countless battles against prejudice in his own life, small and large, and had died too young, his heart worn out from a lifetime of swimming against the current. "This is a different world, Mom," Adrian said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "And I'm in a different position. That fire, I've learned how to channel it, how to turn it into fuel. She didn't just insult you, Mom. She insulted everything I've ever worked for, everything we've ever worked for." Their moment of peace was shattered by the incessant buzzing of Adrian's phone on the glass table inside. It had been vibrating non-stop for the last hour. The story had broken, and it was spreading across the globe like a digital wildfire. Adrian ignored it, but the sound was an intrusion, a reminder that their private ordeal was now public property. Curiosity finally got the better of him. He retrieved the phone, his thumb scrolling through a cascade of notifications. He saw the headlines from news outlets he recognized: CNN, BBC, the New York Times, and from dozens he didn't. They were sensational, crafted for maximum clicks. CEO's vengeance. Airline boss flies 4,000 miles to fire racist flight attendant. The mother of all karma. How a phone call grounded an airline. And, from a particularly odious tabloid, was it a stunt? Insiders question CEO's dramatic showdown. He saw his own face, a candid shot from a business conference next to a blurry, pixelated image of Carolyn's, likely snapped by a passenger. He saw his mother's name trending on Twitter, a hashtag #FlyLikeEleanor, gaining momentum. He read snippets of comments. Thousands were laudatory, celebrating him as a hero, a model son, a champion of justice. "This is the kind of leadership we need," one read. "I'm booking my next flight on Polaris Airlines," said another. But there was another, darker stream of commentary. Vicious, racist trolls slithered out from the dark corners of the internet, defending Carolyn, accusing Adrian of playing the race card and calling his mother a grifter looking for a payout. Conspiracy theories bloomed, suggesting the entire event was a brilliantly orchestrated PR stunt. Adrian's face hardened. He tried to shield the screen from his mother, but she had already seen the expression on his face. "What is it, Adrian?" He hesitated, then sighed. "It's the world we live in, Mom. A lot of people are supportive, and some are not." He showed her a few of the positive messages, the outpouring of love and support from strangers around the world. But it was the ugly comments that seemed to echo louder in the opulent suite. Eleanor, a woman who had spent her life cultivating a small, private world of kindness and grace, was now a global symbol, a proxy in a culture war she had never asked to join. The weight of it seemed to settle on her shoulders, heavier than any flight attendant's scorn. Thousands of miles away, in a quiet suburban home in New Jersey, Carolyn Smith was living through the implosion of her own life. Her husband, a stoic man who worked in logistics, had been watching the news when her face had flashed across the screen. He hadn't spoken a word to her since, his silence a judgment far heavier than any shouted accusation. Her phone was a conduit of pure poison, spewing hateful messages from strangers and awkward, pitying texts from friends who didn't know what to say. She sat on her beige sofa, the remote control clutched in her hand, compulsively flipping through the channels. There she was, again and again. Her carefully curated image as a poised professional purser had been replaced by this new monstrous caricature, the racist flight attendant. They were using her full name. They were showing pictures of her house, a blurred image taken from the street. She saw her carefully tended rose bushes and felt a wave of violation so intense it made her gag. A deep, bitter resentment churned in her gut. It wasn't fair. It was a misunderstanding. The woman had looked out of place. She was just doing her job, protecting the sanctity of her cabin. She was the victim here, the target of a vindictive, power-hungry CEO and his manipulative mother. This was the story she told herself, a flimsy shield against the crushing reality. But in the quiet moments between the news reports, the shield would crack, and she would see the look in Eleanor Vance's eyes, not of anger, but of a deep, profound hurt. And in those moments a terrifying, unfamiliar shame would begin to creep in, a shame so potent it felt like it could swallow her whole. The karma wasn't just the loss of a job, it was the forced public confrontation with the ugliest part of her own soul. Meanwhile, in a sleek Manhattan office, Richard Davenport was experiencing a different kind of karmic retribution. It began with an email, a terse, formal notice from Polaris Airlines terminating his company's catering contract. It was a multi-million-dollar blow, but he had braced himself for it. What he hadn't braced himself for was the domino effect. News travels fast in the tight-knit world of corporate contracting. The phrase breach of the company's code of conduct was a death knell. It hinted at a moral failing, a lack of integrity that made potential partners nervous. By noon the next day, a German airline with whom he was finalizing a major deal had abruptly postponed their meeting. By the end of the week, a long-standing client had invoked a clause in their contract to request a formal review of their partnership. His phone calls went unreturned. His emails were met with polite but firm rejections. His sin had not been one of overt aggression, but of cowardly complicity. He hadn't thrown the stone, but he had stood with the mob, and now he was paying the price. The karma for Richard Davenport wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the slow, agonizing squeeze of a python, constricting the life out of the business he had spent a lifetime building. Back in Paris, after a sleepless night, Adrian woke with a new sense of purpose. The anger had not dissipated, but it had crystallized. It had a name and a mission. He called an emergency virtual meeting with his executive board. "Good morning," he began, his face projected onto a massive screen in the Chicago boardroom. The board members, a collection of mostly older white men, looked back at him, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "I'm sure you are all aware of the incident on Flight 57. What you may not be aware of is that this was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a disease that we have allowed to fester for too long, a disease of complacency, of unconscious bias of a corporate culture that pays lip service to diversity but fails to practice it in any meaningful way." One board member, a cantankerous old guard executive named Harrison, cleared his throat. "Adrian, while the incident was regrettable and your response was certainly decisive, are we sure we aren't overreacting? The markets are jittery. This could be seen as a PR stunt, an admission of guilt that could open us up to litigation." Adrian's gaze was glacial. "I'm not interested in the markets, Harrison. I'm not interested in PR. I'm interested in doing what is right. And I can assure you the only litigation we need to worry about is that which will come from our continued failure to protect our passengers and employees from discrimination." He then laid out his vision. It was bold, radical, and expensive. He called it the Eleanor Vance Project. It was a top-to-bottom overhaul of the company's culture. It included a new mandatory Dignity in the Skies training module, developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations for every single employee. It involved the creation of a fully independent passenger advocacy board, with the power to investigate and rule on discrimination complaints. And its cornerstone was a $10 million scholarship fund, the Eleanor Vance Scholars, to support underprivileged students pursuing careers in aviation and hospitality. "My mother," Adrian concluded, his voice thick with emotion, "believed that I belonged in rooms that were not designed for people who look like us, She cleaned floors so I could sit in boardrooms. This project is not just about fixing a problem. It's about honoring her legacy and the legacy of all those who have been told they don't belong. This is the new Polaris Airlines. If you are not on board, I suggest you find another airline to fly. The boardroom was silent. The gauntlet had been thrown. The idea for the foundation came a few days later, organically from Eleanor herself. The hotel had begun forwarding her messages, letters, emails, even flowers from strangers who had been moved by her story. She spent an entire afternoon reading them. A man from Ohio wrote about his elderly father with dementia being mocked by airline staff. A young Muslim woman described being singled out for extra security checks on every single flight. A transgender teen wrote about being misgendered and ridiculed by a gate agent. Story after story of casual cruelty, of systemic indifference, of everyday humiliations. Eleanor wept as she read them. Her own pain, which had felt so singular and personal, was now part of a vast shared tapestry of hurt. She was not alone, and in that realization, her fear and shame began to transform into a quiet, steely resolve. That evening, she found Adrian on the balcony again. "Adrian," she said, her voice firm, "this isn't about us anymore, it's about them. All of them." She held up the stack of letters. "Your project is a wonderful thing, but it's for your company. What about the others? What about the people who don't have a CEO for a son to come and save them?" And so the Vance Foundation for Dignified Travel was born. It was her idea, her vision. Adrian provided the seed money and the logistical expertise, but the heart and soul of it were all Eleanor. Months later, at the Foundation's inaugural gala in New York City, Eleanor Vance stood at a podium, facing a ballroom filled with journalists, activists, and supporters. She was no longer wearing her sale-priced Macy's dress. She was wearing a simple but elegant gown, a gift from Adrian in her favorite shade of blue. She was nervous, her hands trembling on the lectern, but as she looked out into the crowd, her eyes found Adrian's. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, and she felt a wave of calm wash over her. "I am not here tonight because I am special," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "I am here because of what happened to me. But what happened to me has happened to so many of you. You are told you are too old, too brown, too different to be treated with basic human dignity. They try to make you feel small, to make you feel invisible. But I am here to tell you that we are not invisible. We are not small. Our stories matter. Our dignity is not up for debate." She spoke of her life, of her work as a nurse, of her belief in the fundamental goodness of people. She spoke of her fear on the plane, but she also spoke of the love that had saved her. She didn't speak with anger or bitterness, but with a profound and moving grace. She was not a victim. She was a witness. As she finished her speech, the ballroom rose to its feet in a thunderous, sustained ovation. Adrian watched his mother, this quiet, unassuming woman who had once been afraid to fly, now commanding a room of hundreds, her face illuminated by the stage lights, her spirit shining even brighter. The journey that had begun with an act of hatred had ended here, in a symphony of love and respect. It was a legacy not just of hard karma, but of a harder-won grace, a testament to the enduring truth that the best way to fight the darkness is to become, against all odds, a light. Eleanor Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is not determined by the labels society places on us, but by the content of our character and the strength of our convictions. It's a story about the corrosive nature of prejudice and the incredible power of love, courage, and a son's devotion to righting a terrible wrong. The hard karma that found the flight attendant and the complicit passenger serves as a stark warning. Our actions, big and small, have consequences. But more than that, this is a story of hope. It shows that one incident, one voice, one act of defiance can be a catalyst for real, lasting change, creating a ripple effect that touches countless lives. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in the power of justice and the enduring strength of the human spirit, please give this video a like. Share it with your friends and family. and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching.